In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody who is on the call right now. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us to benefit from this talk. We have such a pleasure to welcome Imam Khalid Griggs. He's Imam in the community of the Mosque of Winston-Salem. Associate Chaplain for Muslim Life at Wake Forest University, Vice President of Islamic Circle of North America, member of the Central Shura of ICNA, a board chairman of ICNA Council for Social Justice, mashallah. He is a founding member of Muslims for Social Justice, member of Movement to End Racism and Islamophobia, a board member of Interfaith Winston-Salem, and trustee of Parliament of the World's Religions. Imam Khalid is a human rights and prison reform activist, national lecturer, freelance writer, and author of Come, Let Us Change the World, subhanAllah. A brief history of the Islamic Party in North America. He is the former editor of ICNA's Message Magazine, Community Access Television Board Chairman, producer and host, and co-convener of Black Leadership Roundtable of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. So we have the pleasure of having Imam Khalid Griggs with us today, alhamdulillah, and he is going to give us a talk about how to give da'wah to the Black community. Now, the African-American community make up 1/3 of all Muslims in America. So it just is, we should all be abreast about, we should all be knowledgeable about how to give da'wah to this humongous community that exists in America right now. It is incumbent upon us, especially what's going on now, with all of the things that are taken forth to end racism out in America. We need to be at the forefront of that, not only combating it in our communities, but also trying to do our best to bring our African-American brothers and sisters into the fold of Islam, because we know, Malcolm X said it, everybody said it, Islam is the thing that will end this race problem in America. Islam is what we offer as the cure, as the shifa to what's going on. So I don't want to be too long-winded, so I will welcome our Imam, my good brother. I met you in Texas, alhamdulillah. It was my pleasure. Welcome, Imam Khalid Griggs. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, akhi.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I want to start by apologizing for my lateness. I was not able to connect with my internet this evening. Tried different laptops and all like that. But it's my pleasure and honor to be able to spend a few moments with you discussing giving dawah to the African American community, and just talk a little bit about the African American Muslims having a legacy of dawah. And I want to say at the outset that I realize that I am the final workshop. You've had a number of series of workshops by some very eminent and illustrious scholars and da'is, and I recognize that I'm coming at the end of all of this. So I will tailor my remarks to be very specific, because I'm very sure that some of the basic issues are just about giving dawah in general. You've covered that so thoroughly that I will focus particularly on the subject that I've been given, and that is giving dawah to the African American community and some peculiarities and just what we should do. But I want to begin by saying that first and foremost, it's essential that we recognize that Islam is not a new phenomena for people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and more particularly here in North America. As early as the mid-1500s, the Spanish started bringing enslaved Africans to this landmass of North America. And the concentration with the Spanish and their enslavement was primarily, not exclusively, but in the area that has become known as the United States. It was primarily in what was referred to at that time as La Florida. And this was an area that started with the Carolinas and went all the way down to modern-day Florida. And when the Spanish began to bring enslaved Africans into the Western Hemisphere, there were various kings and queens of Spain, particularly Ferdinand and Isabella, the same two that had paid for Chris' trip, thinking he was going to the subcontinent of India and bumped into the Caribbean islands. But Ferdinand and Isabella, when they realized as Spanish monarchs that African Muslims were being brought into the Western Hemisphere by many African enslavers, they had a royal decree put out. And this royal decree stated that if any slave ship was found to have African Muslim cargo, as they refer to the bodies of the Africans as just property, but if they had any African Muslim cargo, that the ships would be sank in the Atlantic Ocean or wherever they were found, because the Spanish had had over 700 years of interaction with Muslims and with African Muslims. So they were very keen on not importing Muslims into the Western Hemisphere. They wanted to settle this land, to rip off its resources, to take advantage of whatever people they may find, but not to settle Islam and Muslims into this hemisphere. And I'm not going to go through the entire history. We know that the English, 1609, they were bringing enslaved Africans in on the East Coast into the Northeast. We know that this hideous trade continued for over 400 years. But there was never a time throughout this long and prolonged history of enslavement of Africans in this country that there were not a significant number of Muslims in the ranks of these enslaved folks. You know, the literature that the American government, the documents that is founded on, like the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, have some very high-sounding words and expressions about freedom and the freedom and liberty of individuals. But, of course, this did not relate to people of African descent, and particularly it did not relate to the African Muslims in North America. Now, let me just give you a couple of the historical facts, and then I'll move on to our specific topic here today. And one is that one would think that the early presidents of the nation, George Washington, the third president, Thomas Jefferson, and those that followed were keenly aware of the presence of Muslims in the ranks of their slave populations. Of course, George Washington had over 300 or more slaves, and Thomas Jefferson had over 200. But one thing that was interesting, and with Thomas Jefferson in particular, that Thomas Jefferson actually received 2 Arabic manuscripts that were given to him by a person by the name of Ira Nash, who was living in the Louisiana territory. And he requested an audience with Jefferson, and in 1807, he actually brought 2 completely Arabic documents from enslaved Africans who had made their way from this Louisiana territory up to the state of Kentucky, had escaped twice from Kentucky and had made it to Tennessee. And they were following this Cumberland River. And while they were fleeing in Kentucky and in Tennessee, they actually sent these documents to the then President of the United States in 1807. So Thomas Jefferson, even though he espoused this wonderful language in these founding documents, he was a slaveholder himself, but he was also aware of the presence of African Muslims in the enslaved population in this country. Now, let me get closer to the present, and just one more final point about this particular era. What we know from this antebellum colonial period in the United States was that the way that Americans approached the institution of enslavement was very different than what was going on in South America and the Caribbean. The American enslavers were very preoccupied with stripping the enslaved population of their culture, of their language, stripping family members, ripping family members apart, taking away the language, and then eventually forcing a perverted version of Christianity on this enslaved population. And I say perverted version because the version, or the enslavers' version, and preachers like Cotton Mather up in Boston, Massachusetts, these early colonial Christian preachers preached to the enslaved population that to be humble, to be dutiful, and that their salvation was tied into how submissive and dutiful they were to their so-called masters. And so that large, significant number of Muslims who were brought to North America as enslaved people had, for the most part, their religion forced from them, those who were Muslims. And there are very significant numbers who maintain their Islam throughout their period of enslavement. And if there's a question and an answer, if we can double back on that. But I'll move forward more into closer to contemporary times, and then talk about specifically giving dawah to the African American population that's existing in this country today. Now, as we move closer in time, and let's just jump all the way into the 20th century, there's also a misconception that the first Sunni Muslims, or the first Muslims, or first people advocating for and pronouncing their involvement as Muslims came from a heterodox group or some hybrid group of Muslims. And, I hope this is not a sore point with anyone when I say that, when I say refer to the Nation of Islam as a heterodox group. But in terms of the actual foundational beliefs of Islam, the Aqidah of Islam is why I'm referring to the nation as a heterodox group. But prior to this, there were numbers, there were tens, there were hundreds of African Americans who had embraced Islam, or Orthodox or Sunni Islam, prior to the 1930s in this country. However, many of those who embraced Islam, particularly on the East Coast, and particularly in New York, at the turn of the 20th century, were given dawah, or their expression of dawah, by Ahmadiyas. And the Ahmadiyas came into this country and went straight to the African American communities and gave their version of Islam. They propagated their version of Islam primarily in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, primarily to the African American population. And even with this, the un-Islamic teachings of the Ahmadiyya, what we find is that the principles of liberation, the principles of only worshiping one God, that we are only the Abdullah, we're only servants to Allah and shouldn't be servants and slaves to any other person or any other formation that we may conjure up in our heads and in our minds. And so even with these distorted teachings of Islam, of Ghulam Ahmed of Qadian being a prophet and however he identified himself, there were a significant number of African Americans who embraced the so-called version of Islam, particularly in the musician community. So you find many people who became very famous musicians embracing this Qadianism or this Ahmadiyya philosophy in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Now, I want to talk about, and trust me, I'm going to get there. Just bear with me just a few more borders. I want to talk about perhaps the greatest or the person that I know of, no single person in the United States of America who has given more shahadas, not influencing people to become Muslim, but giving more shahadas than Sheikh Dawood Faisal. Sheikh Dawood Faisal established the Islamic Mission of America in 1924 in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn. And Sheikh Dawood Faisal, the numbers, there's a wide range of numbers of people that Sheikh Dawood was directly involved in their shahada. I've seen numbers of 10,000. I've seen numbers even approaching 20,000. But I think by the testimony of any of the senior Muslims and just reading the literature, you would agree that there is perhaps, and Allahu A'lam, there is perhaps no single person who's given more shahadas than Sheikh Dawood Faisal, this brother from Grenada, who came to the United States along with his wife, and she was referred to as Mother Khadijah. She was a very significant figure in her own right. One of the uniquenesses about Sheikh Dawood was that Sheikh Dawood, as a person of African descent coming from Grenada, when Sheikh Dawood came into New York, as he acquainted himself with the community, as he established a masjid at what was referred to as 303 because of the number or address or the location of this first mosque, and then what's is mostly called the State Street Mosque, the name of the street where this Islamic Mission of America was located on. Sheikh Dawood brought a sense of the equality of all Muslims. He came as a Muslim, but he didn't come with an attitude that my Islam is more genuine and authentic than anyone who converts to Islam, that their Islam can never be as authentic because I was born into a Muslim family and I have practiced Islam for all of these years. So it was something very attractive about Sheikh Dawood. And one of these things, and I've talked with brothers who are even older than myself who are Muslim, and they said that he had a really magnetic and he was very charismatic. But what really attracted African Americans and others and Latinos, but particularly African Americans, was the even-handed way that he addressed the needs that were peculiar to the members, his Muslim members from the African American community, that he gave as much attention or more attention, but at least equal attention to every component, ethnic and racial component of his community. And Sheikh Dawood, because of this kind of magnanimous spirit, because of the way that he dealt with Muslims of every race, every nationality, every ethnicity, people loved him, and it attracted the newcomers, the new Americans who were just arriving as Muslims into this country and settling in New York and coming to his mosque. He treated them with the same respect and dignity as he treated those who were converting to Islam. So within the State Street Mosque, you had a large number of very ethnically and racially diverse Muslim population there. And the reason why I emphasize this point and I contrast the attitudes of individuals like Sheikh Dawood and the heterodox teachings of the Ahmadiyyas when they came into the United States and started putting out their expressions of Islam, that they were not, I don't want to use the word afraid, but they didn't have any internal conflicts or prohibitions for going into African American communities and reaching out to African American people with the message of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as a result of this, there was and I hate to just keep repeating it, but there were so many shahadas that Allah allowed these individuals to bring to Islam with one dimension, and that being the way that not coming in a self-righteous, not coming as any aspect of I'm superior to you, I'm better than you, you'll never be like me because I was born as a Muslim, and these kinds of things. So, and I'm going to go all the way up until current times, but I want to state at the outset by using the example of Sheikh Dawood, using the example of so many others that I can use from that era and subsequent eras in this country, that one of the most important attitudes in approaching African American with Islam and with Dawah is that recognition that there are, like with everyone, there's certain cultural sensitivities and sensitivities about what goes on in the current society and what has happened specifically to people of African descent in the United States. And why is that important? It's important that in giving dawah that we are to people of African descent, that we use a language, and of course I'm talking about English, but we address the brothers and sisters in a way that's not condescending, that we're not using language like you people. I've met some really good people amongst you people, and using language that is commonly used by white racists and have come down through the generations as a result of a white supremacist dominated environment in this country. And so we can have the best intentions in wanting to spread Islam and talk to and spread Islam to this particular population of Americans. But I'm just suggesting that first and foremost, don't use language that that we've picked up that just through assimilating with those who don't have racial sensitivities and ethnic sensitivities, that we don't use that language. Let me give you another example. And this is from what's going on right in society today. Because of the continued oppression, because of the continued implementation of structural systemic racism, anti-Black racism. We find that when George Floyd was killed by this Kevin Carpenter out in Minnesota, and Carpenter's just callous disregard for human life and for Black life, the way that he did it without any concern about who was watching, how many people were standing there begging to get his knee off of this man's neck, the physical non-resistance, even before he was put handcuffed, hands behind his back, laid face first on the pavement. Even before that, Mr. Floyd was not resisting arrest. I didn't hear anywhere where he's cursing anybody out like some raging mad person. But this event in itself was not enough to warrant the kinds of demonstrations that we saw in all 50 states, in tens and dozens of cities across the country and around the world. It was a continuation of acts of brutality, anti-Black brutality, anti-Black not caring about the lives of Black folks, that we saw this kind of focus on matters and issues of race, that there has been a more heightened awareness and consciousness about issues of race, particularly as it relates to Black folks. And so just as people of African descent who was brought here as enslaved persons, that there has never been a form of slavery, and we're talking about the chattel slavery here, there has never been a form of abuse, and I'm not trying to create a misery index and compare the suffering of one people over another, but for over 400 years, an institution that was basically unparalleled in its brutality, in its perpetuation, that there has not been an institution that equates with this, perhaps in human history. And so when we see events that have happened in the extrajudicial killing of George Floyd, his murder on the street by a Minneapolis policeman, we find the most sensitive issue, particularly for white Americans to discuss in this country, are issues about race, racial injustice, anti-Black history, the sufferings, and all of these things. You can read books like White Fragility. There's so many tracts out there now that talk about how issues of race have been so difficult for white folks and other to talk about, but particularly white people to talk about in this country. But now, because of what happened to George Floyd, this is a discussion that is on the lips, is in the minds, is in the hearts of people, not just in this country, but you see all kinds of demonstrations in France and England and in countries on the African continent even, where you see people now reflecting upon the anti-Black discrimination and prejudice that they are suffering at the hands of their police officers or hands of white, like in this country, white domestic terrorists, the police. It's the individual acts of racism, and it's the systemic, the structural acts of racism that people now are talking about. And so as Muslims, understanding that as Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, our martyr, Shaheed Malcolm X, had said that America needs to understand Islam because it is the cure for racism, that as difficult and as long a history that America has had at its foundation, racist, anti-black teachings and philosophies and enshrined in its documents, that America would do best to understand Islam. Malcolm didn't say that everybody needs to be Muslim, but Malcolm was pointing to the principles of Islam. Of course, he was inviting people to Islam, and I would dare say that, just like I said about Sheikh Dawood being personally responsible for giving shahadas, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, within just 11 months of his life, the last 11 months of his life, has influenced more individuals to embrace Islam in North America than any single individual. And so just as Malcolm was saying that America needs to understand Islam, if we want to understand those critical issues, those heartfelt issues amongst African American people, then you and I need to be most effective in our dawah. And this is my humble opinion, that we need to understand this culture, this land, that we need to understand specifically in giving dawah to how to systematically give the dawah and call people to Islam. And my first, after I took Shahada, and I was involved in an organization based out of Washington, D.C., called the Islamic Party in North America, one of the roles that I had was to be head of a 12 to 14 person dawah team that 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, every day, we went out into neighborhoods. We went through downtown DC. We set up dawah tables. We printed our dawah materials. We had our own printing press. We printed the materials. We had publication. We had membership across the country, and and it was a dawah organization. You know, we did other things, but the primary function of this organization was dawah. And one of the distinguishing qualities and characteristics of the organization is that we, in our dawah, particularly when we were talking to oppressed people, we tried to reflect how Islam addressed issues that were impacting and affecting them. There was a brother, and I'll never forget this brother. He's still very dear to me, who was a little older to me. And he was around me. He had already embraced Islam when I came into Islam. And he had overheard me talking to people about Islam. And he impressed upon me at an early, young age that if we're talking about dawah, no matter how long a conversation that you're having with an individual, you may not ever see that person again. So if you are not mentioning Allah, if you don't mention in a 2-minute conversation even about Allah and our responsibility and duty to Allah, you're not giving dawah. And he taught me early on, in the early 70s, that let everything come from that, come from Allah, come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but be as relevant as we can to the condition and the needs and even the history and the social history of the people that we're talking about. It's not saying know the zip codes of where people or everybody's living. It's not talking about know the family history. But particularly in times like this is the most opportune time, in my humble opinion, for us to target with our dawah African American non-Muslims. Let me give you another example, and I'll move forward and make some other points. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the travels of Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, during that last year of his life. He spent as much or more time traveling throughout the Muslim world and the African continent in that last 11 months as he did here in the United States. He started off by making Hajj in April of 1964, and it was in and out and traveling for the rest of that time. And throughout Malcolm's travels, he recognized that there are universal issues that no matter what color, no matter what ethnicity a person may come from, but there are universal issues that we share in common. And so when Malcolm was on his way back in his final trip from out of overseas back into the United States, he stopped in Geneva, Switzerland. And he stopped at an Islamic center that was founded by Said Ramadan with the Muslim Brotherhood. And when Malcolm had extensive conversation, and it wasn't the first time they had communicated, but they had extensive dialogue, and Said Qutb actually wrote out 9 questions that he wanted Malcolm to respond to. And Malcolm said, sure, I'll do this. And the night before Malcolm was martyred, on February the 20th, 1965, when he was in a hotel in Manhattan, the night before that fateful day, February the 21st, 1965, Malcolm's wife, Betty Shabazz, said that Malcolm was still answering the questions from Said Ramadan. One of those, to me, significant questions as it relates to this discussion about Dawah, one of the observations that Malcolm made when asked by Said Ramadan, Malcolm, you're not in the nation anymore. You're a very intelligent man. You understand that Islam is not, as Elijah Muhammad's movement was teaching, that this is only for black people and white people are devils and this kind of thing. Why do you pay so much attention, even though you are a Sunni Muslim? Why do you pay so much, and I'm paraphrasing the question, but why do you still pay so much attention to the black community? And I thought in Malcolm's brilliant way of giving dawah and expressing maybe complex ideas in very simple terms, Malcolm said, I approach that like a farmer. And this farmer has land. Some of his land is much more fertile than the other land. And so the intelligent farmer, if he's trying to get an immediate yield, he will first plant his seeds. He will hoe up the ground. He would give attention to that fertile land. And when he's exhausted that fertile land and planting and harvesting, and not completely exhausted, but when he's gotten yield from that, then he will go and spend his time with the land that promises much less yield. And so he was saying, and he actually came out and said that in America, the most responsive receivers of the call to Islam were coming from the African American community. And so Malcolm was saying that that's the fertile field. And he told Said Ramadan that the problem that many of the immigrant Muslims who come to this country, the problem that they make is looking beyond this fertile field and thinking that what if we get this population of Americans to embrace Islam, or that population will have a ready-made, strong base of people, because those people in the black community, they're poor, they ain't got money, and blah-zoo and blah-zoo. But Malcolm was saying, well, these are the people who are the most responsive to the message of Islam. And so as we approach the African American community, my humble suggestion is that we, again, be sensitized to the needs, use good, as much as we can use good politically correct language, not just with African Americans, but with any people that we're giving dawah to, but have a desire to give and take Islam, to spread the message of Islam to those who you may not see the immediate benefit, how people like me can be of benefit to the Islamic movement, to the spread of Islam in this country, and for the most part, just kind of overlook that population, which is going against the Sunnah, the divine methodology is expressed through the Dawah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that there was no hesitancy in sharing Islam and having the Sahaba share Islam. This, and you know the sura better than I. You know this prophetic methodology for Dawah better than I. And so, in actuality, if we just follow what we know was the prophetic methodology for Dawah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that is being sensitive to the conditions of the people. If there's nothing like the Prophet ﷺ did with so many who were being tortured, that all he could do, if they were from that realm of Meccan society that didn't have influence or a strong tribe to defend them, all he could do, and as an expression of his fellow brotherly feeling, the best thing he could do in Mecca at a certain point was to tell those who were on the lower realm of Meccan society to just be patient. That this is all I got for you right now. I can't free you right now. I can't take you away from the immediate conditions. So just be patient, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears the plea and the call of the oppressed. And so as we go out and we give our dawah, my humble suggestion is that even in our dawah literature, particularly in the times in which we're living today, that we fashion some of our brochures, that we fashion booklets, that we write occasional papers, that we do other things to specifically address the African American population. Because very similar to the time when I embraced Islam in 1972, looking for what kind of ideology, what kind of theology could satisfy my needs for a connection with the Creator, with my Lord, while at the same time not ignoring the social conditions that I and the tribe that I come from, the conditions under which we're living. So I think our Dawah literature, if it's not already, we need to produce the literature that addresses the conditions under which Black folks in this country today are going through a period of awakening. And the greatest awakening, unlike the period of the 1960s and 1950s, it seems that the greatest awakening right now is coming from white folks. It's coming from people who themselves, not personally, but their ancestors have been most responsible for the conditions, the anti-Black conditions that that Black people in this country had suffered from. And it's not like it ended with the end of enslavement. It's not like it ended with the end of the Jim Crow segregation laws. It's not like it ended with all of the lining that mortgage companies would do, and to not sell property or not let African Americans rent property in certain areas, that insurance companies would have what they call red line. They draw these lines on maps that were supposed to keep African Americans out of. And so this is my final point, and I hope that we have some questions. And I apologize, I didn't mean to take it up this close to the end of the time. I started late and I didn't adjust for the time. But the last point that I'll make is that with all of his promises of freedom and equality and all of these things in the founding documents and all of the Statue of Liberty, giving your tired, your poor, and all this stuff in the middle of Ellis Island, with all of the language of freedom and language of liberty, and I'm not condemning the language; it's good language, but the Muslims, we have the key to unlocking those ideals that for 252 years as a republic, this country has not been able to unlock these ideals for its people of African descent. It has not been able to unlock these ideals for those who have been victimized by the 1%. So I'm going to stop at this point abruptly. I apologize for going so long, but I hope that there's some questions that we could just have a little more discussion around. Assalamu alaikum.
Sure. So just one question that I had specifically, Khalid. So what do you think we should do?
What should you do?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of I mean, as we know, the racism we face today, the racism. I was wondering, do you think, from a movement perspective, what do you suggest we do?
Right. Very good. That's a very good question. First and foremost, I think we should all have the ideal of being anti-racist ourselves. It's not enough to just say that I don't use the N-word behind black people's back and I don't tell jokes about black folks behind their backs, and I may listen to other people do it, but I don't do it myself. And sometimes we get satisfied in thinking that because we don't use certain language or we don't show certain outward signs, that we don't harbor racist feelings in our own hearts. Let me say this as plainly as I can say it. Any population that has been colonized by any European nation, and I say especially the British, because the British have always viewed themselves as the blue bloods of the Europeans, and they look down on other Europeans and have historically looked down on other Europeans, and they have, at one point, we know the sun never sets on the British Empire and stuff like that. So any nation that was colonized by them and other racist European nations and suffered under colonialism, you can come to this country unknowingly having racist opinions and ideas about black folks in this country, because the British in particular were the masters of setting up a so-called colored buffer between them and black communities. So, that's a part of a longer discussion, but we got to say, we have to have the ideal in our hearts that I want to be an anti-racist Muslim, right? And then we need to educate ourselves on how do I bring that about? How do I become an anti-racist Muslim? We need to understand, as I mentioned earlier, this history. We need to read stuff like How to Become an Anti-Racist by an author by the name of Ibram, I-B-R-A-M, Kendi, K-E-N-D-I. And he wrote a longer piece called Stamped from the Beginning. This is a book about the history of racist ideas and concepts in the United States. It's one of the best in one book that I've read in a very long time. But he, like I said, this other book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So one, as as movement workers, we need to make sure we have purged ourselves or made attempts to purge ourselves of the dominant philosophy and mentality of racist ideas and prejudicial ideas that has governed this land from its inception. Then I think that in our Dawah in particular, we have to make deliberate attempts, particularly with our younger folks. We have to make specific attempts to reach out to the African, to reach out to the African American community, not like Christian missionaries going into Africa, on the continent of Africa to Christianize the savages or something. Here in the neighborhood where I live, the Mormons, historically one of the most racist sects of religious people in this country. They have a very racist history. Many of them still are very, very racist in their beliefs. And almost every week, I see these guys riding on bicycles with white shirts on, these men with bicycles and white shirts, riding, and I live in the inner city, riding through the neighborhoods, talking, knocking on doors, talking to people. And I get this image of, they're like going into the jungle, Christianizing the natives. We have to approach, when I say go to the African American community, not like the saviors of the community, not like we're going to save you from your horrible, horrible conditions, but we are sharing the message of Islam and reflecting and understanding that your conditions, how you have remained in these conditions, are the very reason that people have been demonstrating since Memorial Day and recognizing that there is this thing called systemic racism that has trapped hundreds and millions of people into the social and economic underbelly of the society, and all of them ain't black folks. So we have to educate ourselves. That's, to me, first and foremost. To be most effective, we have to have the will to be an anti-racist. We have to use language that's appropriate. We have to write in our Dawah tracts materials. Let me just give you one example. In the materials that were written in the 1960s and 1970s, in much of this Dawah literature that went out into the community, it specifically addressed how Islam is a liberating way of life. The belief in Allah itself is the ultimate liberation, and all that means. But in so many other areas that directly impact the black community, Islam has that solution, like Malcolm saying, you need to understand Islam, get rid of the racism, and this kind of thing.
Yes.
So that's a start. And with books and literature, you can go to the Council for Social Justice website. And on that website, we have put together a long list of books that we recommend that you read, videos, podcasts, and a number of other things.
Sure. There are a few other questions. Brother Loha has questions. Go ahead. Okay. So the first.
So the first question that was posed to you, Imam, is that you have given a methodology how to give dawah to the African Americans and others. Will you and your organization set up teams in the urban areas?
That's a very good question. I love that. Yes, it's definitely our intention to do this. Inshallah, one of the things that in being a part of the Council for Social Justice, that I have pushed for and will continue to push for as long as the law gives me breath and an ability to do it, is that we partner with entities like Islamic Relief and other entities in establishing in our urban environments, establishing centers, not masajid necessarily. You get, you have a musalla in there, but it's like a social service, a Dawah center. Establish these in the urban areas. And just as Malcolm has said, this is the most fertile ground for shahadas. And so when we do that, we're going to get a yield. And so if any of you have any ideas or any desire to want to get involved in those efforts, because I'm not just talking out the side of my face. There are concrete efforts in moving in that direction right now. Please get in contact with me, and I'll try to make suggestions and recommendations, and try to put you in contact with folks who are a little closer to you. I don't know if everybody's from California who's on the line or not. Maybe you're not in California, on the left coast, since I'm here on the right coast. But please get in contact with me so we can further this particular discussion.
Okay. The next question is, how do we overcome implicit racism? What are some practical tips do you have?
Okay. Now, that's a two-part discussion, because the implicit racism starts with ourselves. And the things that I suggested about how to become an anti-racist, and it's not enough. And I hear this a lot from young folk in saying that I'm not a racist. I got a black friend. Okay, well, that may be true. You may have a black friend, but that doesn't mean that you don't harbor racist feelings. Some of the greatest racists on the planet, for what they can do, black people can do for them, they love them some black folks, like Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. As long as LeBron James was playing for the Cavaliers and making all that money for him, he loved him some LeBron James. But the moment that LeBron left and went to Miami, the true feelings, not just about LeBron, but how Dan Gilbert, the feelings that he harbors about uppity black folk, came out. And so it takes more than Al just saying that I got a black friend to be comfortable with the fact that there's no implicit racism. I'm not harboring these kinds of things. If you are listening to black jokes and the punchline to the black jokes is denigrating African-American people or African-American Muslims, and you're listening to it, you're not contributing, but you're just listening, then you're being complicit in perpetuating this kind of attitude. So we have to take stands against things when we recognize it. This is the time for us as Muslims. If there was ever a time in your lifetime, now is the time for us to sensitize ourselves and to become more vocal in our opposition. It's not just enough that me and my family and those of my friends are not being victimized by inner city problems or racial discrimination and the way that the black folks are. It's not enough. These are our brothers and sisters, and we have to not be like this guy in the White House now who seems to be incapable of showing empathy. One of the qualities of a Muslim is to have a strong sense of empathy, and this is what we have to develop.
Alhamdulillah. So the next question would be, how would you do dawah to a black Hebrew Israelite?
Okay, when you find out, you let me know. Yeah, it's one thing, and I say that because I've tried it before, and it's it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But I'll use their example and extend it to other people. Dawah, as much as some folks love the Ahmed Deedat form of, his form of Dawah, before he passed, rahmatullah, of beat the opponent down, this was not the prophetic methodology to give Dawah. So Dawah shouldn't be a debate. And I know as a much younger Muslim, I wanted to share with anybody who had a different theology and ideology, a different life system other than Islam. I wanted to try to convince them that Islam was superior to anything, and I felt I had to do it in one conversation. And so I spent a lot of time debating with people like Hebrew Israelites and others, as opposed to giving. I mean, we want everybody to embrace Islam, for more importantly, for Allah to guide them to Islam. But Islam is not a debate. And when we determine that people are not listening to what we're saying, they are just given 10 seconds before they jump right back so they can try to debate you tit for tat, then the Prophet ﷺ showed us the methodology, hey, bro, to you your way, to me mine. I ain't believing what you believe. You're not going to believe what I believe. So let's cut it right here. So don't waste a lot of time arguing with people, regardless of what philosophy that they express.
Alhamdulillah. That's a good point, Imam. Alhamdulillah, because you waste a lot of energy like that. And one thing about being Muslim, sometimes we think it's our job to combat bigots, and that's not our job, and sometimes it can be appealing to try to win over the one who detests us, but that's not always the goal. We want to talk to the people that want to talk to us, that want to change their lives, inshallah. So
just next man up, next woman up.
Exactly.
We don't have to. Yep.
Okay, so the next question is, I'm Catholic and was raised Roman Catholic. I accepted Islam because all people, no, I'm Caucasian and was raised Roman Catholic. I accepted Islam because all people are equal in Islam. That should be stressed in Dawah. So that was kind of like a question. That was kind of like more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, but I think it's a very telling statement. And I think that we should keep that in mind in giving Dawah. And as I said, particularly to African Americans, that appeals. The Prophet ﷺ's last, sermon on Arafat, there's no superiority of white over black, black over white, Arab over non-Arab, non over Arab. These are appealing to people who've suffered from racial discrimination. I know it was for me. Those things are very appealing. And I just say this real quickly, just as an observation. I'm not a chaplain. I was for a number of years at Wake Forest University, but I took on more responsibility with ICNA, and I couldn't balance the two, and so I chose working with ICNA. But a number of the Catholics that I had met on campus and just in life, and especially those who eventually became Muslim, would always identify themselves first as, I'm a recovering Catholic, as if their experience, for whatever reason, was not the best of experiences, but they still gonna give Islam a chance. So I've had a number to say, and I'm saying this not in a disparaging way, but just in a kind of in a joking way. But I've heard so many Catholics refer to themselves as recovering Catholics.
Yes, alhamdulillah. So The next question or statement is, one has to be able to educate themselves with truth to combat others. We have to allow people to be who they are and give dawah with hikmah. So that's a like a statement / a question. Alhamdulillah,
Right.
Dr. Abdul Salam. May Allah bless and protect you. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Another question is, what is Nation of Islam and how to give them the dawah?
You know, that's a good question. You know, the larger question right now for me is what version of the Nation of Islam is the person following or practicing that you're giving dawah to? And I say that because the Aqidah and the religious practices vary sometimes very greatly from one area where people are in the Nation of Islam to another area. They'll all say, I'm in the Nation of Islam. The one area, they may be praying 5 times a day, they're reading Bukhari and Muslim, and they're fasting, not in December, but during the actual month of Ramadan. And, you know, they're doing these things. And then there are others who are holding on more to the, you know, Elijah was the prophet to the black man, and, you know, the language may have changed a little bit about Fard not being necessarily the Allah walking on earth, but he's the Mahdi, the chosen one. I mean, the expected chosen one for the Muslims. So first, I think that is who are you talking to? Because and it's only important because you want to know where to start your conversation. Is this somebody who still believes that Elijah Muhammad is a prophet? You know, is this somebody who believes Fard was Allah himself? You know, what's your starting point? So, you know, tell me what you believe about this, what you believe about that. The nation is a very interesting American phenomena that has spread, you know, different places around the world, but still in its history, it's been primarily an American phenomena. And it's interesting that some of the most dynamic Muslims to come from the African American community have come through its ranks, you know, like a Malcolm X, like a Muhammad Ali, like a W.D. Muhammad, Wardi Muhammad, like so many of these brothers and sisters, like an Imam Siraj Wahaj. I mean, there's so many folks who've come through their ranks. So the doctor who made the statement in the previous question or statement that you read about using hikmah, I think that's very important. I mean, don't start off, and what we shouldn't do, and Allah instructs us, don't curse at other people's gods because they end up cursing Allah. So don't put ourselves in a position for them to talk stupid about Allah or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by, you know, calling ourselves giving dawah. And in actuality, what we're doing, we're attacking what they believe. And once you attack somebody, it's harder to say, okay, now that we fought up and down the street, now come on, let's go drink a smoothie together or something. They don't want to be bothered with you after you attack like this. I mean, you're not condoning what false beliefs with anybody, but Allah just tells us don't attack their gods because they attack yours, and you know, attack not God, astaghfirullah, but they attack Allah. So we have to use wisdom as we give dawah even to members of the nation, keeping in mind that so many who African Americans have come from the Nation of Islam to the Islam that we're practicing today.
Alhamdulillah, and I agree with you a lot. It's, you know, a vast question However, we do the best that we can, alhamdulillah, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide us all, us all to the straight path of Islam.
Ameen.
One thing that I just want to add, we have a lot of people on the line, and whoever may be looking at this, we have to take this presentation by Imam Khalid. We have to take this very seriously. This is not just a lecture like you would hear, and you turn it off and wow, this is good, and he has some good points, and alhamdulillah, go back home. No, this is a call to action. And the call to action first starts with the want. So one of the things that we can do to put a pedal on these things and start giving dawah in the African American community is to want to give dawah in the African American community. So if we start with the want and we say to ourselves, listen, this is something we need to do. This is something that is pivotal to us as an organization, to me personally, then everything else will fall into place. So I'm with you, my brother, and I'm ready to set up anything that we need to set up. And I hope that the people watching this will join our hands and we actually do something about this. We put together a plan and we go forth with this dawah to the African American community. It is essential. It is very, very essential that we do this. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. And jazakallah khair, Imam, for the beautiful presentation. Brother Saad, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, I would like, it's funny, right before COVID, we started our dawah at the station. Yeah,
we did. We started our branch of it. We gave dawah in Watts.
Alhamdulillah, very good.
Yeah. And it stemmed from a conversation that we had in Texas about giving dawah to the African American community, a workshop that we had in New Jersey about giving dawah to the African American community, and we had a group of people, and we went to Watts and we gave dawah and we got 3 shahadas.
Oh, subhanallah.
Yeah, and we were very, very well received. And so the next week we were supposed to go to Compton, and COVID-19 just washed everything away. But inshallah, we can get started.
Inshallah. That's right. Yeah, inshallah. I don't know when. Allah knows best, but there'll be a time we can get back there. But in the meantime, let's find ways that we can reach out without having to necessarily physically go there. I'm really proud of you guys, man. Alhamdulillah, that's really good. I'm glad to hear that. And this is exactly the essence of what I was trying to convey. I mean, don't be afraid. Let's go there. You'll be surprised. If you haven't been in certain communities before, folks will be surprised, as you just said, how receptive to Islam folks in the community are. I make this real quick point. I have honestly said, and I honestly believe that in so many in the African American community today, that there's some kind of genetic coding that's going on, that who knows, my great grandfather may have been one of those persons who was brought here as a Muslim and had his Islam beaten out of him, or had her Islam beaten out of him. And Allah has reconnected so many from this community, like myself, to Islam. And so I don't know if this is making any sense, but I think that this phenomena of how receptive so many African Americans are to Islam once they hear the message is part of Allah allowing us to, bring this root back together, because it's not the first time we've seen this show. It's and something maybe in the genes that's driving us in this direction.
Yes, exactly. If anybody is familiar with the movie Roots, the main character Kuta Kinte in that movie was Muslim. So Alex Haley, the creator of Roots, knew that to tell the authentic story of the slavery or of the African Americans coming over from Africa, he had to make that character Muslim in order to correctly portray the African experience. So Islam is in our roots. It's in the roots of the African Americans. So they will be more than receptive of it, you know. So alhamdulillah.
That's an excellent point. You know, Alex Haley was an interesting guy, and you know, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ speaks of, you know, Allah will use even you know, I guess like not just a disbelieving, but almost a wicked person, a person who may be their behavior is not pleasing to His law, to help the cause of Allah. And I won't get into the, you know, narration of the hadith, but Alex Haley was an interesting guy. Allah used this man to bring out the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that subtitle as told to Alex Haley. And Allah used this guy to spend 12 years of his life to research his family roots, and he traces it back to 100% Muslim village in Jufere, Gambia, in the west coast of Africa. 100% then in the 1700s, and it's 100% today. And so Allah can use anybody to further the cause of Islam.
Exactly, and that autobiography is still creating shahadas to this day. So many people have came into Islam through the autobiography of Malcolm X to this day. May Allah be pleased with him. And yeah, the brother co-authored that book, and it's just something how everything works out. So
hey, can I give one other book suggestion? In addition to the autobiography of Malcolm X, I suggest that you all read the Diary of Malcolm X, and it was edited by a brother by the name of a non-Muslim by the name of Herb Boyd, B-O-Y-D, and Ilyasha Shabazz. This is one of Malcolm's daughters, and it chronicles his experiences during the last 11 months of his life after he left the Nation of Islam. It's an excellent book that you'll learn so much about Malcolm and the Muslims that he was meeting and the experiences that he had with them, and just the leaders of countries and everything else. And to me, it's a very overlooked book. It's very, very overlooked. I mean, we want everybody to read the autobiography, but Muslims should be particularly interested in this diary of Malcolm, because it chronicles, as I said, his Muslim life, Muslim as we understand Islam.
Alhamdulillah. Definitely, we need to check that out, the Diary of Malcolm X. Jazakallah khair for the recommendation. So, Brother Saud, did you want to add anything?
Yes, actually, one last next week there's a bonus session, inshallah, by our old brother from Jersey.
Alhamdulillah. Next week, the same time, right?
Yes, we have Alhamdulillah, Brother Mustafa Hijaza speaking on logical versus emotional dawah. MashaAllah. So next week, same time, tune in, inshallah. We can have the brother Mustafa Hijazi. He's going to speak about giving dawah, logical versus illogical. Alhamdulillah, a good brother, very knowledgeable brother. I learned a lot from that brother on that road trip. And so, yeah, definitely check it out. Be here same time next week, inshallah. Yes. Please, Sheikh, able to dua?
Yes. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفر الله وأتوب إليه والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Imam.
Brother Dawah, can you make me the host? I can't do that.